Our next interview is with Jeff Weber, who is a local LA area bookseller. And Jeff, I'm going to start off by asking you the same question I ask everybody else to start. Tell us something about your background, family, schools, where you grew up, that kind of thing to start off with.
My background is basically that I'm a son of a library director. My father was director of libraries at Stanford University in Stanford, California. He came from Harvard, and I was born in Cambridge.
Good for you.
And his training was at Columbia University. He got his library degree there, and got his first job at Harvard. And then he was pulled up into the administration offices by Kais Metcalf. And Kais trained him and some other young people and brought him along. And then Stanford hired him in 1961, and we moved the whole family to California at that time. My orientation for books came out of enjoying my father's library partly, but I think I had kind of an instinct or knack for collecting. I collected things that were worth nothing. I collected bottle caps and Mars trading cards, and then I collected stamps and comic books, and eventually became science fiction paperbacks and
amazing stories.
Yeah, I loved those. If those were too valuable, but the dealer I used to I used to sell newspapers, and when I would get my pay, I'd go down and spend it down at the stamp collector shop. Get my bike down there, and he had some of those early things, but those were things that I didn't buy, the amazing stories things. But eventually, I started to work in the Stanford libraries as a student, moving books, and then a job came available at William P. Reedon's bookshop in Palo Alto. And Bill Reedon had a well-established business in AABAA. He had a shop in San Francisco and in Burlingame, and I only knew him when he was in Palo Alto.
Yeah.
And they got me started checking like books in print to see if something was still in print and what the price was, and it was sort of getting Bill some basis for judging the value of a book, and then they'd have me quoting out books from things they recently acquired. Bo Reedon would give me a selection of books to describe, send out a quotation. They used the photocopy machine all the time.
Yeah.
And
I remember that vividly.
Yeah, and so I did that for about a half a year, I think, and then I went to library school. So by the time I was in, I'm getting it all turned around, I think. I actually went from there to UCLA for my undergraduate degree. And then after UCLA getting a degree in history, it was then that I returned to Reedon's again to work for another half year. I didn't expect to have this with dates or anything. But
approximately when?
My memory is that I went to library school and then came back, and that would have been in the end of 1978. And I would have graduated in the summer of '78, and then worked for Bill Reedon for a few months, and then I was hired at Zeitlin and Verbrugge in November '78. That sounds right.
Yeah.
And a very weird story is the very day I left Reedon's, they had another employee there, and he took his own life that
Wow.
very day, not in the shop, but in his own home. He was distraught over losing a girl that he was just totally in love with. Carl Zamboni was at Reedon's at that time, and Heise Huntington was working in the cataloging department, and Heise and Zamboni started their business later together. I don't see Heise anymore. Of course, Carl's passed away. But Carl was famous for being a walking encyclopedia in a chimney with his Turkish cigars.
He's an incredible guy.
And if you'd ever been in the Reedon's basement, it was. Have you been there?
Oh, I used to go into Reedon's basement about 3 times a year.
It was extraordinary. I mean, there's
nothing like it around.
There was always pockets of stuff all over the place.
I never knew where it all came from. It just always was different.
When I arrived there one time, they had the William Fitzhugh collection there, and it was fantastic. And it got, I was never really knew the whole story, but I believe that it was held up in court because Fitzhugh consigned the books. He died. The son or somebody wanted access to the books, and so Bill ended up holding all these books for years. And I could look through them, and they had the most beautiful monuments in English literature there. They're delicious books. And they also had the Lloyd Cibberell collection, which isn't as famous, but he had a book plate. I knew I would recognize the book plate if I saw it around. Just beautiful books, nice condition, but not anywhere near as fabulous as the Fitzhugh book. So it was just delicious to go in there and see what would really have belonged in the library special collections department, not the bottom of Reedon's basement with all those spiders and the cobweb. Oh, it was very dark down there, and he had just
we used to bring flashlights.
It was like a reference library in a catacombs. That's what it was like.
How long did you stay with Bill before you went into business on your own?
Well, for Bill, I had these 2 sessions where I worked about a few months each, total maybe of a year. And then I'd gotten my library to school degree at Indiana University, worked at the Lilly Library as a student, just doing cataloging of Lincoln material. And then I got my job at Zeitlin Verbrugge, and I worked with Jake for 10 years, as it turned out.
You were 10 years with Jake.
Jake was well, my father had recommended that Jake was a good place to work. He was well known, even to my father, and when I came out of library school, it was 78, and the job market was not as fruitful as it may have, as maybe I wanted it to be.
Yeah.
I hadn't really any preconceived notions of what I wanted to do exactly, other than I probably preferred acquisitions over reference work, and I remember being given an opportunity to take a job interview at like San Diego State to catalog serials, and I just didn't feel like that's what I wanted to do, and I didn't really want to work the reference desk, and the kinds of things that were available to a student getting out of library school maybe didn't seem quite as interesting to me, and having already worked in a bookshop, and it was at that time I thought, well, I'll talk to Florian Chasky at Stanford and see what he thought, and I knew that if I made a decision to go one way or the other, that it would change my career. And I had, for many years, even as a freshman at UCLA, thinking I was going to go on and try to become a librarian. So with Florian's support, my father's support, I tried the Zeitlin position out, and Jake had Bennett Gilbert there at the time.
Yeah.
Bennett was brilliant and pretty short-tempered, kind of wild in a way, but he clearly knew a lot about books, and but he was very. He and I were not close in any way whatsoever. I mean, I don't think many people would say they were close to Bennett in any particular way, but we had this shop full of dysfunctional people, and some were more open and easy to get along with than some others. We had Bennett quit, actually, a little while later. It wasn't long. I don't even think he was there a year before.
No. Was Michael Thompson there at the time you were there?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Michael had left
before you.
Long time earlier. So, I mean, more than a decade earlier, I think. And Bill Reedon Bill Daly was much earlier as well.
Yeah.
And Jonathan Hill was actually closer, and Gary Steigerwald was really the one I had replaced.
You replaced Gary?
Basically, yeah. Yeah, I don't think there was much time between his leaving and mine coming, maybe a few months. And I didn't know any of those guys beforehand. I think I had met Gary, and they had me working in the front of the barn where the art books were, so my workstation, and I got I don't know why, but eventually I learned Jake would allow us to do some buying. I mean, if that were my shop, it wouldn't be the case. But the two bookmen and the print department were allowed to make buys somehow, and I was often sent out to look at collections, and sometimes I would make some crazy purchases, just bringing in 2,000 books to get one plum.
Right.
And every one of them worked out well. Is just not, you were always learning from every time you went out there, and Ken Carmiel would be out there bidding for the same thing, and you'd see colleagues coming in for various collections. But we did buy a lot of things from local people.
As far as mentoring goes, were there anybody other than Reedon and Zeitlin who was an influential character for you in your book career?
Yeah, not really.
They were the two.
They were the two. My father and his father, my grandfather. My grandfather was a professor of English literature at Colby College, and he was known for his work in Thomas Hardy, and he wrote a book that was famous on forage painting history, and
it's in your blood, really.
So we had books all around the house, and his father was a minister in Boston. He had books around his house, and I came to know Howard Carno and Ken Carmiel and the Heritage Boys and Barney Rosenthal and Warren Howell. I would go around L.A. and visit as many bookshops as I could. For a time, at least, you could go up and down Westwood Boulevard. There'd be
I remember
4 or 5 shops there that were fun. Carno's was among them.
Yeah.
And Howard was very friendly. He invited my wife and I over to his house to join in his parties at the beach, and people. It was very different. Kurt Schwartz, he was around, but we weren't very friendly.
What happened to Kurt?
I really didn't know him very well. Had his little house in Westwood Village, and I visited there once.
It used to be a thriving book community.
And I went to visit Harry Levinson. I only went to his place once. It just didn't have the kind of things I was looking for. Frank Spellman was always interesting.
Yep.
He had nice things, and he had more of the things that Ken and he had things that were more of interest to me, the scholarly kind of books. And George Houlet had his shop down there too.
George still has a shop down there too.
Well, George at that time was in Westwood.
But now he's over.
And now he's on Beverly.
Beverly near La Cienega.
Yeah. Well, it's nearer to La Brea, actually.
Nearer to La Brea. Okay. What aspects of the book business have changed for you since the Internet revolution?
Oh, well, the book business, I think, is totally different from what I was learning at Zeitlin's, and the Internet is certainly the major factor. It's affected everything. The most quickly noticeable is the book fairs. I'm not even sure if the book fairs can really survive in the way that we would both buy and sell at a book fair, expect to see more activity.
More customers.
Well, it felt that way.
Yeah.
I mean, we would always complain that there wasn't enough people around, whatever day it was.
Yeah.
This was actually a time when in the Southern California chapter of the ABA, we transferred from doing the shows by the seat of our pants as booksellers to hiring a management firm to represent the trade, and devote their time to making the shows work, because it was all too much work. I mean, this was before my time, but it was at that very time that this transaction was happening. And it made a big difference. I think that when you started to have a committee of booksellers working together to make a show work, and then having a management firm carry out what they wanted. It was far more effective. And
absolutely.
And I remember specifically that Barbara Rutenberg was influential in bringing in many more international dealers to the Southern California shop. And then it was at the same time that the Getty was looking to buy, and she'd say, well, the Getty's coming in and buying books, and the UCLA's coming in and buying books, and that would get dealers in here.
Yeah.
It always will. I mean, as long as they're buying.
Yeah.
But you don't see the Getty here now.
No, and you don't see an awful lot of dealers buying either.
Well, it feels that way, but I think they're buying, but they'll buy a selective item here and there.
Yeah.
They won't buy. I would come out of a show with 2 boxes of books before.
Easily.
Now I'll buy 2 books. I've bought 2 books at this show. I'm not ever going to try to buy a couple of boxes of book at a show like this.
You're not going to be
Prices are at their height already, and it's reaching. I mean, you can't really see room above on some things. Some things, if you have the imagination, you can take another thing. I looked at several things yesterday. I mean, $10,000 for this book, and I look it up online. There's another copy for $3,500, another their copy, and if it's already being offered for sale, they haven't sold it. They're probably exposed to the clientele that you might be thinking of, and what can you do?
Do you find that that you've gotten a lot of new customers from the internet?
Well, not really, no. Because I don't feel like they're the kind of regular customers that we'd call the backbone of our...
Mostly they're not.
Yeah, I think that while we do get some who return again and again, they like to use the internet. They're really oriented towards trying to repeat the pattern of what they had already done. And even if we tell them that it's costing us a percentage that we're losing, we're not really dealing on the same circumstance. They're going through a middleman, and they don't realize they're paying the middleman. And so we have to either... I've done this every which way. I've either kept my prices all the same all across the board, listing them on 6 different sites, or I've raised them on some sites and kept them the same on my site and the ILAB site, which is the one I want people to use to buy books.
Yeah, unfortunately, we got most of our sales coming from Abe.
Abe is by far the strongest.
Yeah.
And of course, our own ILAB site is one of the weakest.
Yeah.
Because our dealer base is so much smaller. It's never going to change from that. No. We have no choice. But I feel strongly that site is very important that we keep, because it's ours, and when you have a bookseller-owned site, that's what we really want. We want to be able to use that as our tool. But Amazon is performing terrifically right now. Barnes & Noble does not do so well. I think it's because I go through A-Libris. A-Libris takes a percentage. Barnes & Noble is getting another percentage above that. We're paid crap for shipping. And
absolutely. It's so ridiculous.
I have issues with that all across the board. The idea that every book weighs 2 pounds and can be shipped anywhere for $2.65, and then no insurance. No one wants to take care of the merchandise that you want to take care of yourself. The kind of care that you would take. International shipping in flat rate envelopes that don't protect books is something we have to do commonly, but it doesn't protect the book the way we would have always learned to wrap properly. The trade with ABE is not a professional trade. It's a conglomerate or a mishmash of
that's what it is,
of pea soup in a way. So some people, I mean, it's sort of the eBay thinking of, anybody can be a dealer, and you don't know who you're dealing with on the other end. Some of them are very professional, even if they're not members of this association.
That doesn't mean they're not.
You get every kind of thing happening. I actually ordered an item once from Germany and was horrified. I mean, you do. This is why you're a dealer, because you learn from every single thing you do.
Right.
I'm horrified when I received what I ordered, and it was a total photocopy. And it was described as being the original book and photocopy, and I wrote to express some displeasure with what I was delivered. And I don't read German, but I would check to see what I was getting, and there was no indication that the item was facsimile or something. But that's the kind of thing that if you went to a bookshop 20 years ago and you see the book handle it, you buy this book, you see another book you like, you might even buy several books. You go on the internet and you don't know what you're reading represents what you want or not. And so you just have to be a smart buyer, and you're going to make mistakes, and whether you're a dealer or a private collector, and some of my collector friends seem to make very smart buys on either eBay or on online. Frequently enough, because they have target vision for one thing, and that's always been the advantage of a private collector, no matter who they or when it's been. Because if you were interested only in history of chemistry in the 1970s and earlier, you could go to every store and look for just that, and do fine. You could build a fine collection. Nowadays, those same things seem to be priced so high that you can't make too many decisions to buy those things because your money's gone.
Well, look a little into your crystal ball, and what do you perceive as the greatest challenges facing the antiquarian book trade?
One right now is the constant change. We have so much changing that each year really looks different in terms of the challenges of meeting the technological demands. That's really key. If you can't keep up, then you make adjustments. I mean, either you close down. In Los Angeles, at least compared to Boston, I don't see the same thing happening between those cities in terms of the differences in the trade. We have, in Los Angeles, lost a lot of bookshops. And the reason is that the rents have gone up.
Yeah.
That's the primary reason. It's not really the internet as much. It's a huge influential factor. But when you have fewer customers coming in daily, and you pair that with somebody saying, well, your rent's going to be 3 times higher or whatever. There's a shop in Pasadena, he's paying $12,000 a month rent. And he's
Books?
I'm sorry?
No,
Brand Books is in Glendale. I'm talking about
Glendale,
Pasadena. That's Book Alley.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a massively huge floor space, and it's fantastic to think that a secondhand shop could do that. And they're 2 blocks away from the Pasadena City College, and I'm sure that he's hopeful that he can turn some student textbook trade into a real business. Yeah. But you have to sell a lot of textbooks buying
with $12,000 a month rent.
I mean, it's hard to imagine.
So mind-boggling.
At Zaitlin's, Jake owned his building, and the building sold for around $750,000 when the shop was over and done in 1989. So they would have been renting it, if it were for rent, presumably for around $7,500 a month, even then. Yeah. And that would have been a lot for a bookshop to handle. Heritage did it. They were actually certainly paying more than that with their location on Melrose. But that's the kind of thing that has changed in Los Angeles. And so if you didn't own your building, as usual, bookshops get pushed out, and some of them have closed. Some still continue at home. Bill Daley's moved to his home. Mike Thompson's moved from his shop to an office. Yeah. My shop, when I started in 1988, when Jake had died, I knew that I would continue my business, or I would start my business on my own rather than work for another dealer, because by the time I had say 5 years into Zaitlin's, I knew that the things that I had as issues with their business would have been things that they wouldn't let me do unless I had my own business. So why work for someone else? You'd end up with the same problems. It pretty much amounts to management style and what you buy and what you do with things. And I want to do this, and they wanted you to do that, and so on. So in any event, when I started my business, I could have tried to get a storefront, but I chose instead to work at home, because I knew that with science and medicine, these are areas where we don't have a whole lot of clients in one area coming here to buy that particular thing. It's really an international clientele that we're looking at, so you're going to best handle them by catalog. And so I've done that. I've done that since I started my business in 78, I'm sorry, 1988, and the catalogs continue from me, but many of my colleagues have stopped. The internet seems to be, to some dealers, enough, they think.
Yeah.
But I don't see how it can be, because you can never ask somebody to look at your internet site long enough, in the sense that if I send something to your mailbox every month, that you're going to look at my catalog. You may put it down, not look at it, but I think from my sales results that they do.
We've got about a minute left to go, Jeff, and just if somebody were to come to you and ask you for a piece of advice, a young bookseller, what would be the one most important thing you could say to that bookseller as a piece of advice?
Well, the quick answer to that is to work for someone else.
Just for apprenticeship first?
Yeah, yeah. You want to do that for 3 to 5 years. That's the best advice. Learn on someone else's nickel.
Nickel, yeah.
Learn the trade through someone else. But the other advice is really not to get into it unless you're really devoted to it. I don't know. There's most of the people here, they do it because they love working with books. Maybe they love working with some book people and so on. But there's some inner drive they have to have. And
I agree.
some people have left the business because it's not lucrative enough, and you know, when those rents went up and they couldn't have the kind of shop they envisioned, and they said, no, that's enough. I mentioned that the technology was changing so fast, and I can see how it's threatened many occupations. And it seems inevitable that the middleman, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, ABE scenario where we're all having to deal with through them is that it can threaten our business in the sense that they kind of own us all. We have no power in what they do on our behalf, and you know, can drive some of us out of business. I would think. I think in the long run, it doesn't look so favorable in that regard. But if you think there won't be enough books, it seems like there are enough books right now. I think there are new things to collect all the time if you have the vision to see it. A huge difference for me from the history of science, history of medicine, from Zaitlin's 1970s experience to now is seeing the emergence of 20th century authors, off-prints, people wanting to buy Nobel Prize winners, and journals are part of the things that get sold. And there were things that we knew about. We knew they were important. We didn't have them in stock at that time. And that kind of thing has changed. I think those changes keep us going to some extent. We can't have shelves and shelves of incunabula anymore. Yeah. But you know, another thing for me is that even though I'm a specialist, if an opportunity comes through the door, I'm going to act on it. Yeah. So that I don't stick to my specialty specifically. I have to allow what comes my way to help me continue through what I do.
Well, that's great. Thanks very much for the interview, Jeff, and thanks for participating in the project.
My pleasure.